Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's chilling tale from the land of the rising sun. I'm your host, Takeshi Yamada, and I'm here to share with you a story that still haunts me to this day. It's a tale of friendship, mystery, and the dark forces that sometimes lurk just beyond our perception. So, please, make yourselves comfortable, dim the lights, if you wish, and allow me to take you on a journey into the shadows of Japan's urban legends. Our story begins on a crisp autumn evening. Much like tonight, the leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the landscape in hues of red and gold. It was during this season, last year, that I received the news that would change my life forever. My dear friend, Kenji, had passed away. Now, you might be wondering why I'm sharing this personal tragedy with you. Well, it's because the circumstances surrounding Kenji's death were unusual, to say the least, and I believe that by telling you this story, I might find some closure, or perhaps a warning for others who might encounter something similar. Kenji and I met during our university days, about 10 years ago. We were both attending a local university in our hometown, a small city nestled in the mountains of central Japan. For those of you unfamiliar with Japanese university life, it's a time of great freedom and exploration for many young people. We often say that the years spent in university are some of the best of our lives. Kenji and I hit it off immediately. We shared many interests, from our love of classic Japanese literature to our fascination with the supernatural. We would often stay up late into the night, discussing ghost stories and urban legends over cups of green tea. Little did we know that our fascination with the otherworldly would one day come back to haunt us, in ways we could never have imagined. After graduation, our paths diverged slightly. I moved to Tokyo for work, while Kenji stayed in our hometown, taking a job at a local company. Despite the distance, we remained close. Whenever I had time off, I would return home, and Kenji was always the first person I'd call. It was during one of these visits, about 5 years ago, that our story truly begins. It was New Year's Eve, a time when many Japanese people return to their hometowns to celebrate with family and friends. Kenji and I had been drinking sake and reminiscing about old times, when he suddenly got an odd look on his face. "Hey, Takeshi," he said, fumbling with his smartphone. "Take a look at this photo. It's really strange." He handed me his phone, and I saw a picture of what appeared to be a photograph, taken of an old album page. In the photo was a young boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, standing on a bridge. Behind him was a magnificent waterfall, one I recognized as a famous local landmark. The boy was smiling and making a peace sign with his fingers, a typical pose for Japanese photos. But what caught my attention was the figure next to the boy. It was a girl, about the same age, holding the boy's hand. However, her face was turned away from the camera, looking towards the waterfall. "That's me," Kenji said, pointing to the boy, "but I have no idea who that girl is. I can't remember ever taking this photo." I looked closer at the image. There was something unsettling about it, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. The girl's hair seemed to move slightly, as if caught in a breeze, but the rest of the image was perfectly still. "Where did you find this?" I asked. Kenji explained that he had been doing some New Year's cleaning, a common tradition in Japan, when he came across an old family album. This photo was tucked away in the back, and he had no recollection of it ever being taken. "I've been asking everyone I know if they remember this girl," Kenji said, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and frustration. "But no one seems to know who she is." I handed the phone back to him, feeling a slight chill run down my spine. Maybe it's just an old photo you forgot about, I suggested, trying to sound reassuring. We take so many pictures as kids, it's easy to forget some of them. Kenji nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Little did I know that this seemingly innocuous photograph would be the beginning of a nightmare that would consume my friend's life. The next time I saw Kenji was during Golden Week, a series of holidays in early May that many Japanese people use for travel or visiting family. To my surprise, he didn't mention the photo at all during our meeting. I thought perhaps he had forgotten about it or lost interest. How wrong I was. It was a sweltering summer day when I received a call from Kenji. His voice was filled with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Takeshi, do you remember that photo I showed you on New Year's Eve?" he asked, not even bothering with a greeting. I confirmed that I did, feeling a sense of unease creeping over me. "Well, something's happening to it," Kenji continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "The girl in the photo, she's moving." I felt my blood run cold. Surely, I must have misheard it. "What do you mean, moving?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I mean, every time I look at the photo, she's turned a little more towards the camera," Kenji explained, his voice rising in pitch. "It's like she's slowly trying to face me." I tried to reason with him, suggesting it might be a trick of the light, or his imagination playing tricks on him. But Kenji was insistent. He promised to send me a new picture of the photo, and we ended the call. True to his word, Kenji sent me a new image of the photograph. I stared at it for a long time, trying to see what he was seeing. At first, I couldn't notice any difference. But then, as I looked closer, I felt a chill run down my spine. The girl's position had indeed changed slightly. Her head was turned just a fraction more towards the camera than I remembered. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the original photo had been taken at a slightly different angle. Maybe the lighting was different. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Over the next few months, Kenji became increasingly obsessed with the photograph. He would call me at all hours, excitedly reporting on the latest changes he had observed. Each time, the girl in the photo had turned a little more towards the camera. As Kenji's obsession grew, I noticed alarming changes in my friend. When I managed to visit him, I was shocked by his appearance. He had lost weight, his clothes were disheveled, and there was a wild look in his eyes that I had never seen before. It was as if the photograph was draining the life out of him. I tried to talk to him about it, to encourage him to seek help, but he brushed off my concerns. He was convinced that once the girl in the photo fully faced the camera, he would recognize her, and all would be explained. The last time I saw the photograph was about a year ago. Kenji had sent me another update, and this time, the girl's face was in profile. Half of her features were visible, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Her eye, the one visible in the photo, seemed to be looking directly at the camera, directly at us. The next few months were quiet, too quiet. Kenji stopped calling as frequently, and when he did, our conversations were brief and stilted. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to help him. Then, one night, I received a call from Kenji at around 1 a.m. His voice was trembling, barely above a whisper. "Takeshi, I need your help," he said, his words slurred and panicked. "The girl in the photo, she's almost fully facing the camera now. I can almost see her entire face. But, I'm scared. Something's not right." I tried to calm him down, to reassure him that everything would be okay. I suggested he have a drink to calm his nerves, which in hindsight, was probably not the best advice. We talked for a while longer, and eventually, Kenji seemed to relax a bit. "Thanks, man," he said, his voice sounding drowsy. I don't know what I'd do without you. Good night, and thank you. Those were the last words I ever heard from my friend. The next morning, I received a call from Kenji's mother. She was hysterical, barely able to form coherent sentences. Through her sobs, I managed to understand the terrible truth: Kenji was dead. The police ruled it an accidental drowning. They found him in the bathtub, fully clothed, as if he had stumbled in by mistake. But there was one detail that his mother shared with me later. A detail that still haunts my dreams. Floating in the bathtub with Kenji's body was a photograph. It was waterlogged and crumpled, making it impossible to see what was depicted. But I knew it was that cursed photograph of the little girl. In the days that followed, as I helped Kenji's family with the funeral arrangements, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. Kenji's mother confided in me that she didn't believe it was a simple accident. She said Kenji had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to his death, almost as if he was possessed. I wanted to tell her about the photograph, about Kenji's obsession, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. How could I explain something that I didn't understand myself? To this day, I'm haunted by questions. What was the true nature of that photograph? Who was that little girl? And why did she seem to come to life? Was it all just a tragic series of coincidences? Or was there something more sinister at work? I may never know the answers to these questions. But I do know this sometimes. The things we dismiss as urban legends or ghost stories have more truth to them than we'd like to admit. Sometimes, the line between our world and the world of spirits is thinner than we think. So, my dear listeners, the next time you come across an old photograph, particularly one with faces you don't recognize, be careful. Look closely, but not too closely, because you never know what might be looking back at you. And remember, in Japan, we have a saying Ichigo. Ichi-e, one time, one meeting. Each encounter in life is unique and should be treasured. But sometimes, those encounters can lead us down dark paths we never intended to tread. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it serves as both a tribute to my dear friend, Kenji, and a warning to those who might find themselves face to face with the unexplainable. Good night, and may your dreams be free of haunting images. Craving more terror? Brace yourself for our next spine-tingling story. A cursed artifact, a vengeful spirit. What horrors await? Hello, dear viewers. My name is Takeshi, and I'm here to share a chilling tale that still sends shivers down my spine. Grab a warm blanket and settle in, because what I'm about to tell, you might just keep you up at night. For years, I've been running a small studio that specializes in video and audio production. It's been a modest operation, but it's allowed me to pursue my passion for creating content. However, as times have changed, so too has the landscape of our industry. In recent years, we've seen a significant shift in how content is produced and consumed. With the rise of streaming platforms and user-generated content, the demand for traditional studio-based production has dwindled. It's a change that's left many of us, old-timers, feeling a bit lost in this new digital world. To adapt to these changes and keep my business afloat, I've had to pivot. One of the services I started offering was the digitization of old magnetic tapes. You know, those relics from the past that hold memories frozen in time? VHS tapes, 8mm films, the kind of media that many young people today have never even seen. It's funny, isn't it? In this age of streaming and instant access, there's a whole generation that's never experienced the joy and frustration of rewinding a tape or the anticipation of waiting for a film to develop. But for those of us who remember, these old formats hold a special kind of magic. Now, you might be wondering why anyone would want to digitize these old tapes. Well, let me tell you, there's a treasure trove of memories, hidden in attics and basements across Japan. Family gatherings from the early Showa era, children's sports days captured by proud fathers, when home video cameras first became popular. These are irreplaceable moments of history, both personal and cultural. But here's the thing about magnetic tapes, they don't last forever. Unlike digital files that can be copied endlessly without degradation, these physical media are subject to the ravages of time. They can develop mold, the tape itself can break, and the magnetic coating that holds the precious images and sounds can deteriorate. That's where I come in. People bring me their old tapes, and I work my magic to preserve their memories in a digital format. It's not just a job, it's a responsibility. I'm helping people hold on to pieces of their past that might otherwise be lost forever. You should see the joy on people's faces when they watch these restored videos. Sometimes it's the first time they've seen deceased family members in motion in years. It's a powerful thing, bringing the past back to life like that. I won't lie, it often brings a lump to my throat. But as heartwarming as this work can be, it's not without its peculiarities. When you're in this business, you never know what might be on the tapes people bring you. I've seen everything from awkward family arguments captured by mischievous kids to, well, let's just say some very private moments that were never meant for other eyes. However, nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered. One fateful night, it all started with a VHS tape brought in by a man in his 70s. Now, this wasn't just any old fellow. He was what you might call a tech enthusiast of the first generation. You know the type, the kind of guy who spent most of his salary on the latest gadgets back in the 1970s, when personal computers were just starting to become a thing. This man knew his stuff when it came to recording media and playback devices. Honestly, his knowledge put mine to shame. And I do this for a living. So when he told me he couldn't make heads or tails of this particular tape, I knew we were dealing with something out of the ordinary. According to him, only the first 30 seconds or so of the tape were playable, and even that was heavily distorted. From what he could make out, it seemed to show a woman he used to date before he met his wife. Now, you can imagine the awkward position this put him in. He couldn't very well show this to his wife of many years, but he was too curious to simply throw it away. Plus, he swore he had no memory of ever recording such a video. I'll admit, I was intrigued. The challenge of restoring a tape that had stumped even this tech-savvy gentleman was too tempting to pass up. So, I agreed to take on the job, promising payment only if I succeeded in restoring the video. That night, after everyone else had gone home, I set up the tape in my specialized equipment and started the playback. What I saw at first seemed innocent enough. A beautiful young woman, probably in her 20s, sitting on the edge of a bed, in what looked like a typical business hotel room. She was wearing denim pants and a floral shirt, her posture perfect as she stared directly into the camera. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, just as the woman's lips began to part, the image started to distort. It was like watching a glitched out GIF, you know, those animated images you see online. The bottom half of the screen turned into a mess of static. Then the top half, accompanied by an unsettling buzzing noise. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with VHS technology, let me explain something quickly. VHS tapes store information on magnetic tracks, kind of like roads or train tracks. If the playback head in the VCR doesn't align perfectly with these tracks, you get this kind of distortion. Back in the day, VCRs had a tracking knob to help adjust this. But with old tapes and modern equipment, it's often a lost cause. But this is where my professional equipment comes in. Using a combination of optical and digital approaches, I can usually restore even heavily degraded tapes. So, I got to work. Gradually, the image started to clear up, and I could hear sound. The woman was silent at first, but then she started speaking. She mentioned her name, commented on the weather, and talked about a concert by a band that was popular at the time. Nothing too out of the ordinary so far. But then, about 3 minutes in, things took a turn for the bizarre. The woman suddenly raised both arms above her head, as if stretching. Then, keeping her feet firmly on the floor, she began to, well, the only way I can describe it is that she started doing sit-ups without using her legs. Now, if you try this yourself, you'll find it's nearly impossible without anchoring your feet. Your legs will naturally lift off the ground as you try to sit up. But this woman, her feet remained planted on the floor, as her upper body snapped up and down with unnatural force. What made it even more unsettling was that she continued to speak throughout this strange movement. Her voice remained calm and steady, showing no signs of exertion. It was as if the audio and video were from two completely different recordings. It was at this point that I noticed something odd about the audio waveform on my editing software. What I had assumed was a stereo recording actually showed different patterns on the left and right channels. The audio I'd been hearing was only from the left channel. The right had been muted. Curious, I switched the output to the right channel. What happened next? I still have nightmares about it. The moment I flipped that switch, an ear-splitting sound blasted through my studio speakers. It was like nothing I've ever heard before, and believe me, I've worked with some pretty extreme metal bands in my time. The closest I can come to describing it is imagine a chorus of people screaming "ah" at the top of their lungs, layered over each other dozens of times and distorted beyond recognition. The sound was so intense, so viscerally wrong, that I felt physically ill. My vision blurred, and I frantically tried to cut the audio output. But even after I managed to yank the speaker cables out, the horrific noise continued. I must have passed out at that point, because the next thing I remember is my colleague shaking me awake. How long I was unconscious, I couldn't tell you, but I'll never forget the look on my colleague's face when I came to. "What were you watching?" he asked, staring at the monitor with a mixture of confusion and unease. I turned to look, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The screen showed the same hotel room and bed from before, but where the young woman had been sitting, there was now a dark, reddish-brown stain on the white sheets. The stain formed a horrifyingly clear outline of a human figure with arms raised, and it trailed down to the carpet, ending in two distinct footprints. In that moment, all I could think was she barefoot? I don't remember her being barefoot. I tried to explain what had happened to my colleague, but when we rewound the tape, all we could see was that disturbing stained bed. The recording cut off abruptly after that. My colleague, being more level-headed than I was at that moment, simply said, "These things happen sometimes." But I couldn't shake the feeling that we had witnessed something unnatural. I returned the tape to the client, telling him I hadn't been able to restore it. He seemed disappointed, but I felt a strange sense of relief. Whatever was on that tape, whatever had happened to that young woman, I felt it was better left in the past. So, my friends, if you have any old home videos lying around, I urge you to digitize them before it's too late. But be warned, You never know what forgotten memories, or forgotten horrors, you might unearth in the process. Thank you for listening to my tale. I hope you'll sleep well tonight, but if you find yourself lying awake, wondering about the secrets hidden in your own family's old videotapes, well, don't say I didn't warn you.